want to thank you for being here this morning. And I want to ask, have you ever been tricked by someone? Maybe you've been led through a situation and somebody told you that things were a certain way and you found out later things were not that way. Or there's some conspiracy that you learned about. I think that's one of the biggest things that we see in the news nowadays is everyone wants to uncover the next conspiracy, right? Because we want to chase all the people out and we want to be able to declare our witch trials against them and all kinds of things because nobody's going to trick us, right? Conspiracy, being tricked and taken advantage of. But that brings up the wider thing about, how do we go through and make decisions about things in life? Because we're not always going to know all the information. Sometimes there are going to be things that we don't realize are false. How do we navigate that and make choices? And then how do we react when we find out that we've made the wrong choice? We thought we had all of the evidence. We tried to make the best informed decision that we could, and come to find out we were still wrong. So whether that's conspiracy or not, those all bring up sort of similar questions, and we're going to talk about a conspiracy today and some lessons that we can take from looking at that conspiracy, that trickery, deception of what was going on. And we're going to be in Joshua chapter 9. I would encourage you all to turn to Joshua 9. This might be a familiar story to you, it might not be. Teaching the preschool class, we're going through Joshua and Judges, and I find that they probably wouldn't sit through what I'm about to talk to you about today. So I'm going to talk to you about it instead of the 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. But this story, you may have heard of the Gibeonites before, or maybe you haven't, where they came up with this idea of how to trick Joshua and the nation of Israel into making a treaty, a covenant with them, so that they wouldn't be included in the people who were wiped away from their homes. So we're going to talk about this, and in many ways, this story just seems a little odd as to what's going on. It's clearly an exception as to what's going on in the book of Joshua. These people seem to get off scot-free in comparison to the other nations around them. And a lot of it also has to do with Israel's integrity. How are they going to navigate in making decisions as God's people? How are they going to be in their relations with other people in representing this Lord to the nations? How do we navigate decisions and things that we're trying to decide and then deal with making the wrong choice or making the wrong call? And that is what we see in this Gibeonite situation. And so let's look first at the trickery that takes place. And so we're going to start at the beginning of Joshua chapter 9. And we'll be doing a lot of reading today because it's a story and the author lays out for us certain details about it. So if you have your Bible open and beginning at Joshua chapter 9 and verse 1, it says, "So as soon as all the kings who were beyond the Jordan in the hill country and in the lowland all along the coast of the great sea toward Lebanon," and it goes on to list all these nations that we're talking about, the Hittites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, when all of them heard of this, they gathered together as one to fight against Joshua and Israel. So where this is taking place in the book so far is the people have entered into the promised land. They've crossed over the Jordan River into the land of Israel, and they have taken 2 cities. They've conquered 2 cities so far, Jericho and Ai. And the rest of the people living in the land, they start to hear about this, that these people are coming, and they have, for one, captured Jericho, which was a fortress. How did this ragtag group of nomadic people do that? And now they've captured Ai. And so all of the different peoples, the clan peoples living in the land say, we got to do something about this or we're next. But in verse 3 it says, "But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai," they heard the stories of this conquest, "they on their part acted with cunning and went and made ready provisions, and took worn-out sacks for their donkeys, and wineskins worn out and torn and mended, with worn-out patched sandals on their feet, and worn-out clothes. And all their provisions were dry and crumbly. So the Gibeonites are actually part of this group, the Hivites that are talked about there in verse 1. They're part of this. And if you look on the map at all of these places that are being mentioned, you have Jericho, and a little bit north and maybe west of that is Ai. And then if the Israelites were to continue on that same line, do you know what city's next? Gibeon. They're probably the next ones. And so they realize, oh man, they might be coming our way, and what are we going to do about this? Obviously, we can't fight them because they're obliterating everyone, so what do we do? And so they decide this to make it look like they have gone on this long and hard journey. See, our clothes are worn out, and all our food is dry and moldy, and just everything, we've been beaten down just trying to come to you. So this is very early in the conquest, and everyone is conspiring about how to defeat Joshua and the people of Israel. And so the people of Gibeon try to go about this another way and trick them, create this conspiracy, and trying to gain the upper hand. And so at this point in time, these people in Gibeon are about 15, 20 miles away from where Joshua and the leaders of Israel are camping in Gilgal. It's about 15, 20 miles, of course, through the mountains and all kinds of things there. But they're neighbors, basically. And so they figure we have to do something creative here to figure it out. And it says in verse 6, if we keep going, and they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal, 15, 20 miles east, and said to him and to the men of Israel, we have come from a distant country, so now make a covenant, make a treaty with us. But the men of Israel said to the Hivites, perhaps you live among us, then how can we make a covenant with you? And they said to Joshua, we are your servants. And Joshua said to them, well, who are you? Where do you come from? And they said, from a very distant country your servants have come, because of the name of the Lord your God. For we have heard a report of him and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon the king of Heshbon, and to Og the king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth. So our elders and all the inhabitants of our country said to us, take provisions in your hand for the journey, and go to meet them, and say to them, we are your servants. Come now and make a covenant with us. So here's our bread. It was still warm when we took it from our houses as our food for the journey on the day we set out to come to you. But now, behold, it is dry and crumbly. And these wineskins were new when we filled them, and behold, they burst. And these garments and sandals of ours are worn out from the very long journey. And so they lay out this story and say, we've come from this distant land, and we've heard all of these amazing things that your God is doing. The name of your God, you could also translate it as the fame of your God. We're hearing about what the Lord is doing for you, and so we've come from a faraway land to say, we want to serve you, and we want you to make a covenant, an agreement, a treaty with us. So when the Gibeonites come to Joshua and the leaders, it's clear, for one, that the Israelites understood the instruction that God had given them. Do not make treaties with people in this land. Because they say, well, you say you're from far away, but what if you're living in our land? Then we can't make an agreement with you because it's our land. We're taking this over. And of course, the Gibeonites know that. If you're living in our land, we can't make a covenant with you. So Israel knows that, and this goes back to instructions that God had given them before they entered the land. So, for instance, in Exodus 23, he tells them in the instructions, you shall make no covenant with them, the people living in this promised land, and their gods. They shall not dwell in the land, and this is why, lest they make you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you. Don't make covenants with these people. Because if you make agreements and treaties with them, they're going to influence you to walk the wrong way. That is why you can't make covenants. And he reiterates it, Moses does, before they go into the land, to tell them once again. He says, when the Lord your God brings you into the land that you're entering to take possession of it, and clears away many nations before you, and look at this list: the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, which the Gibeonites are included in, and the Jebusites, these 7 nations more numerous and mightier than you. And when the Lord your God gives them over to you and you defeat them, you must devote them to complete destruction. You shall make no covenant with them and show no mercy to them. And of course, as we're reading this, that sounds really harsh, doesn't it? If you understand the larger story of what's going on, God has made it very clear that the people living in these lands have had chance after chance to make their lives right. And they haven't done it. And so God says, I'm going to start making things happen that push them out of the land, most of them. And then when you come in, basically you're the cleanup crew to get the rest of the people out of here, because they have had the chance to turn their lives around and they haven't. So when you come in here, don't make treaties with them, don't make agreements with them, because they will influence you to go and to serve other gods. So that's the danger. And you can see in what Joshua and the leaders say, they remember that. If you're living in our land, we can't make a covenant with you. That's what God has said. And so then the deception comes in. Well, we're not living in this land. I mean, you can look at all of our stuff and see we've come from a really, really far away place because we want to be on your team. We've heard everything that your God's done. They said they heard of all the things God was doing through these people, so they wanted to make the journey so that they could be co-workers with them. They could be on the same side, that they could serve them. And so they put together all these pieces of false evidence to make their story look believable. It's a conspiracy. It's a lie. It's a trick. And all of these things, I mean, they spared no details, right? They made sure their clothes and their food and the sacks, and even making it look like the wineskins had spent, time in the summer sun in the desert, and so they get hot and expand and burst. I mean, they really thought this through. And to Israel, I mean, it would look pretty straightforward, right? Like, obviously, these people are telling the truth. Everything points to that. And so think about it first from the Israelites' point of view. This seems like a pretty clear-cut case. These people have heard about it, and obviously they've come from a really far away place, and so they're not in the land, and so therefore we can make a covenant with them because they're not people that we're supposed to conquer. But as we can see with how the story is presented, even though it was straightforward on the outside, what were the options for handling a decision like this? Obviously they could weigh everything and make a call and say, it looks to me like they're telling the truth, and so I think it would be a good idea just to go ahead and make a treaty. They could decide to investigate further, maybe ask some more questions, or try to separate some of them and see if there's consistency in the story, all kinds of those things. Or, as the author of Joshua is really pointing us toward, they could have asked God what they should do. They should have asked God for guidance. And so that brings us to what are really the central verses of this story, which Mr. Pedigo read for us a while ago. The central 2 verses to this whole story that the author wants us to take away, verses 14 and 15. So after the Gibeonites present all of this evidence and they lay out their case and they present the conspiracy, it says, so the men, that is the men of Israel, took some of the provisions that the people were showing them, but they did not ask counsel from the Lord. And Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live And the leaders of the congregation swore to them. We swear that we won't attack you. We're in agreement, you're on our side. And so how Joshua and the leaders of Israel handled this situation was they said, I mean, this looks pretty straightforward to me, right? We take the stuff and we look at it. It's not like they painted it to make it look old. They took it and inspected it, but they didn't ask God's advice. It could have been as simple as, God, what should we do about this? There's something about this that maybe seems a little off. The Gibeonites didn't just mislead them. It was whole 100% dishonesty. It was a conspiracy. And without God's help, the Israelites would not have had any other evidence to go off of. They could only go off of what they're told, right? When someone lies to you and you don't realize it, you can only go off of what someone tells you. So they didn't know, and they couldn't have known on their own. But if they had asked the Lord for insight or what they should do, then he would have been able to show them. And that is what the author is showing us. So the leaders made this mistake in not consulting God before they made this decision. It seems straightforward. So when you understand this in the book of Joshua, right, these first several chapters are about them entering into the land and starting the conquest. And some things have happened. So they were able to conquer Jericho by walking around the walls and blowing some trumpets. I mean, that's weird. That doesn't happen. I can only imagine the people standing in the city looking and saying, honestly, what are these freaks doing walking around the city? I guess we just leave them alone. But then they overtook Jericho. And they begin to think, well, we can go up to Ai, obviously, because it's small and we can take it. But they go, and surprise, surprise, they can't conquer this sure deal of a city here. And so they've had these lessons to realize that unless God's favor is with them, they won't be successful. And that's the context that the author is presenting this. They've had the opportunities already to realize we need God's help in doing this. But in this instance, they didn't, because it looked like they could handle it on their own. So they aren't always seeking God's wisdom. You know, Joshua, we talk about him as being this tremendous leader, and he was. But he was a human being, and in this case, he made a bad call because he didn't ask for God's help. Because it seemed like a straightforward decision. Oh, we can handle this. I mean, it's pretty cut and dry. These people came from far away. And it's easy to see all of this as it's laid out right in front of us, all of the story. And before we start judging them and for their decisions, because we have this all laid out and we can see every detail that they couldn't see, we need to ask, do we ever do anything like this? What's clear, what's being pointed out, is Israel's self-reliance. They believed it was clear, and they saw the situation, and Joshua and the leaders, they said, oh, we've got this under control. Maybe they said, we don't need to ask God about this, or it just didn't even occur to them because they assumed we can handle this. There's no need to bother and pray on this one or anything like that. So do we ever try and make decisions or navigate life by ourselves? I don't know about you, but yes, I do. It's easy to see this story laid out right in front of us and say, man, Israel was so dumb. They should have just asked God for help. And then we can turn to our normal everyday lives and do the exact same thing. And if someone had our stories laid out in front of them, they would say, man, Ethan is an idiot. How has he not learned by this time that he needs God's help? And so do we try to make decisions and navigate life by relying on ourselves? That's one of the key lessons here in this story, is you have to seek God's guidance and not just rely on yourself. They thought, we've got this under control, it's in the bag, we can handle this one however you want to say it. And it wasn't until a while after studying this, I'd been looking at it and sifting through it, looking at the situation and seeing Joshua and the silly leaders, they're not learning. They don't understand all of the things that God has done for them. And they clearly aren't as smart as I am, who always in every situation make sure to ask God for help first before I make a decision. That's not what I said to myself. Actually, I realized, oh, that's me. So recently, there's been different situations in my life where I have pretty clearly seen this pattern of self-reliance that I usually try to turn to myself first. So my first impulse when a situation arises is just to try to figure it out, with my brain power. I'm going to find an answer, I'm going to do the research, whatever it is. So the car breaks down, an urgent situation arises, I'm struggling to complete a project, and I'm telling myself, whether verbally or subconsciously, I can handle this. I should be able to handle this. That's just like them. We do this. We try to navigate life and make decisions just handling it by ourselves, thinking we can figure it out. We can research online, we can talk to people, we can sit down and write it and draw it out, whatever it is that you do, where we fail to seek God's guidance. And we're not talking about asking God, what haircut should I get? That's not what we're talking about. But in navigating life and trying to be faithful and do His will and facing uncertain situations, those kinds of things, do we turn to God and ask for His help? Because, we might claim to be God's people just like Israel did. Even making oaths in His name, we see in the story they would say, we swear by the name of Yahweh of Israel that we will not attack you. So they're saying we're God's people and we're going to act on His behalf, but then they don't even go and ask His opinion. They don't ask God's advice on this. So that's a lapse in integrity, I think, where they're not being consistent. They're saying we're God's people, but they're not actually being God's people. And so we can sometimes claim to be God's people, right? Even making oaths in His name, which I would not suggest. But functionally, are we in the driver's seat? Saying, I'm one of God's people and I let Him guide my life. But if someone was to peel back the curtain, sort of like a Wizard of Oz situation, do they see us pulling the levers and driving the car and making all the decisions? That's what we see with Israel. And so this event shows us that even if we think we have all the information, we can't see everything. Someone might lie to us. There might be a conspiracy. There's all kinds of things going on in the world that we just can't know the truth about because we don't have that ability. But God does. And so sometimes it's as simple as, just help me, please. Help me. That's all it takes. But that's not always what we do. And that's not what they did in this situation. And so after that, somehow they uncovered the deceit. And so if we look down in verses 16, starting in verse 16, they realize, wow, we've been tricked. It doesn't say how. Maybe they start talking to other people or something clicks for them. But it says in verse 16, at the end of 3 days after they had made a covenant with them, they heard that they were their neighbors and that they lived among them. They found out these people just live over here, 15 miles away. And the people of Israel set out and reached their cities on the third day. And now their cities were Gibeon and Shephirah, Beeroth and Kiriath Jearim. So they figure it out and they say, well, we're going to go talk to them. And the idea here is not that Joshua and a couple people just decide we're going to take a walk and go chat with them. They're bringing the army with. We're going to figure out what's going on here. And in verse 18 it says, but the people of Israel did not attack them. because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. And then all the congregation murmured against the leaders. They started to complain. But all the leaders said to all the congregation, "We have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we may not touch them. This we will do to them. Let them live, lest wrath be upon us because of the oath that we swore to them." And all the leaders said to them, "Let them live." So we'll stop there for a second. So somehow they found out the Gibeonites were lying to them. So they headed out to confront the people. They went to their cities. And I can't imagine the embarrassment maybe on Joshua and the others leaders' behalf, where they realized, we did it again. We didn't ask God's help, and now look at what we've done. According to the instructions that God had given them in the law, they could have been directly punished for this. But I want you to notice, in all of this situation, we don't see God say anything. He's sitting and waiting patiently. He's not dropping the hammer on them. He's not striking them dead as soon as they make the wrong call, but he's waiting patiently. And so they go up to the people here, and even when they uncovered the conspiracy, they found out for sure these people are living in our land and they duped us. Joshua and the leaders would not attack the Gibeonites. I mean, a reasonable question would be, why not just break the treaty since they lied to us? It doesn't count, right? We didn't know all the information when they said all this, so I wouldn't have made that agreement with you in the first place had I known everything, so actually I take it back. But the leaders say, no. We swore to them by the name of the Lord, and we are not going to attack them. And the people didn't like that. They start to grumble, to complain. So coming after the statement of not attacking them, they're upset. It might be in part of their desire to wipe out the Gibeonites and take all of their stuff. It could also be the fact that they say, man, our leaders don't have a clue what they're doing. They're upset about the decision. And also, I think this mirrors what the Israelites had done in the wilderness in grumbling against God and Moses. When they would enter into the situations and they'd see the calls that Moses made through God's direction, and they'd say, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. You should have left us back in Egypt. We don't want to do this. What are you doing? So why wouldn't the leaders attack? Why would they keep their word? They said because they had promised by God's name that they would not do it. The leaders, for one, they took the responsibility in acknowledging we made the wrong call here. We made a mistake, but we cannot react dishonorably because we are representing the name of the Lord. We swore to them by the name of God of Israel that we would not attack them. And to go back on that and to say, oh, never mind, we're not keeping this agreement, that would reflect, for one, negatively on God. But we see the other lesson in the story is when we're wrong or we've been wronged, maybe we made the wrong call or we were lied to or something to that effect. So when we're wrong or wronged, we still are to act faithfully. That's what we see Israel and Joshua do here. So the leaders, they provide an example of integrity to the rest of the people. They acknowledge we made the wrong choice. We didn't do what we were supposed to do, but that does not mean that we can act dishonorably in this situation. They did not go back on their word like the people wanted to do. They could have had revenge and struck the Gibeonites down and said, you know what? You lied to us, and we're not supposed to make agreements and covenants with you people, and so we're going to come in with this army that we're brought, and we're going to destroy the city. But that's not what they did. They said, we still need to act in our integrity, and we need to act becoming of the Lord's name, or we would be guilty just like they are. We would be liars too. And so Joshua and the leaders, they knew that they were representing the name of the Lord to these people, to these nations here. And it was consistent with who God is to keep their word even though they were deceived. It was consistent with who God is to be gracious even though they had the opportunity to take revenge on these people. And they understood that how they were behaving was going to communicate to the rest of these nations about who God was. So even though they were wronged, and even though they made the wrong decision, the leaders directed the people to still act faithfully, to act in integrity. You know, sometimes we can feel like we have all the information, that we're making the best decision, and it still turns out that we make the wrong call. That happens in the small things. You know, I think, oh man, I need a new drill. And so I'm going to spend untold hours on the internet researching what is the best drill for this situation that I need, and it gets obsessive. So it could be that, or it could be in leadership, and you say, we're trying to make the best decision, but you know what? God doesn't always drop the answers down right in front of our laps, and it might come to be that we made the wrong call on something. We've all been in situations like that. Sometimes people are going to take advantage of us. They're going to lie to us. They're going to trick us. There's going to be mass conspiracies that envelop all world leaders and all kinds of things like that. But that doesn't mean that we have to return wrong for wrong. We still have a responsibility to live faithfully, to be God's people. And so we can think of it in the terms of when siblings are fighting and you sit them down and you're talking to them and they say, well, he did it first. Israel could have done that, but they didn't because they realized their responsibility to be God's people. So when we're tricked, when we're duped, when we make the wrong decision and we're embarrassed about it, we can't say, well, they did it first, or they made me do this, or this situation led me to make this call. We have a responsibility to act faithfully. And this is what Jesus said also. So if we look at Matthew chapter 5, in the midst of all these things, Jesus said, starting in verse 38, you've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Or somebody hits you, you hit him back. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if another slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. If someone mistreats you, that is not an excuse to get revenge and to mistreat them also. What do? You act righteously, faithfully, with integrity. If they hit you, you don't hit them back. You act a certain way. So Jesus shows that even when we're treated dishonorably, we still need to be honorable. And in the next few verses after this, Jesus says that this kind of kindness, this way of behaving, is rooted in the fact that this is how God treats people. That he causes the sun and the rain to go on the just and the unjust. That if you only are kind to people who are kind to you, that doesn't mean anything. Be kind also to the people who are not kind to you, because that's what God does. This same attitude, the lessons that we're seeing in Joshua are things that Jesus has instructed us on. That this is how God behaves. So we as his people need to act the same way. So as God's people, like the Israelites were, we need to act in a way that is faithful in honoring him, even when we're wronged and taken advantage of, even when we've made the wrong decision, even when we're embarrassed about the results. And if we take another step back and see what they did, we need God's help to do this. We need to have God's guidance to make the best decisions that we can, to realize you know what? I can't always rely on myself. Because for one thing, I only know so much. I only have so much power. I can only do so many things. I need God's help. And this story shows us the foolishness in trying to rely on ourselves to make all the right calls, to make sure that nobody ever tricks us, to take matters into our own hands. It's foolish. So we see that we need God's help. And even when we're wrong, or we've been taken advantage of, we still have to behave in a way that honors Him. Because you know what? God's not always going to give us the answers. We can ask a question and feel like we don't get an answer to it. Because sometimes it's just about wisdom and reliance on God's guidance. Sometimes it's a make the best decision and not make the right decision. And sometimes the best decision doesn't always turn out to be the best decision. But we have to rely on Him and not ourselves. And so that's really what we need to do as disciples, to realize our indebtedness to God's guidance, to actually go through with it and to work it out in our lives, and to admit when we're wrong, to take responsibility, to still walk in integrity, to be faithful even when we've made mistakes. And for those of us who are not in God's family, I want you to notice something about this story. So the Gibeonites were dishonest. They lied. They tricked the nation of Israel. And according to the law of Moses that Israel had at the time, they were supposed to be wiped out. But there is an exception here. God didn't turn around and say, you know what, Joshua? You guys did make a mistake, but you still have an obligation to get rid of them. God didn't do that. Again, we don't really see God say anything here, but He is in the background watching and patiently and mercifully giving them room, letting them make decisions. And at the end of the story, these people, the Gibeonites, the liars, the tricksters, they are able to live among the people of God. They were servants, they had specific jobs, but in God's grace, they were allowed to live among His covenant people and not have the same fate as the rest of them. And that is huge. That is an exception here in the book of Joshua. And so a lot of us, we've been liars and tricksters, and we've done all kinds of things, trying to get our way, trying to make our way in the world, trying to make the best decisions and to control things in our lives. But we've all made mistakes. But God hasn't struck us dead. He hasn't dropped the hammer on you when you made the wrong decision. But instead, even today, He's still giving you the opportunity to come be among His people, to live in His presence as Israel did. And there's an invitation for you to be able to enjoy His benefits, to experience His mercy, and to be one of His. And if we can help you explore that, answer questions, if you would like to render obedience to God today, whatever it is, grab one of the members, talk to us after the service, or you can come sit with me on the front row and we can talk as we stand and sing.